In the last years, everybody seemed to think that the Chinese economy only knows one direction, that is up. Currently, the Chinese leadership is confronted with a range of difficulties that will force them to make choices, and none of these choices is nice. China has a growing debt pile, China has an overvalued real estate market, and China wants to continue to grow. And it will be difficult to reconcile those three questions, or these three issues. China will either bring the debt level down, this will result in lower growth, or it will continue to pile up even more debt, which is postponing the adjustment, and the eventual crisis will be even worse. So it's a very complicated situation. Premier Li has acknowledged that this week, beginning of March, and I think we'll see more discussion on China in the next months and years. China has, of course, for a long period of time been very beneficial and a very positive contributor to the expansion of the global economy. This is changing. Exports are not collapsing, but they're shrinking, and German businesses are becoming more concerned about doing business in China. In the past, German business people, managers were very eager to be in China. They made lots of money in China, but in the last, say, 18 months, the perception has changed, both in industry and in policy-making circles in Berlin. People understand that China's motivations are less benign than Chinese policymakers have told us over the years, and China is aiming at a leading position in the global economy, which is understandable, but it will, of course, result in a competition with China in a range of sectors that were traditionally very strong in the German economy. I would say that this is a conflict that had to happen. China has been in the World Trade Organization since almost 18 years, and China has failed to adjust. It continues to exploit the benefits of the multilateral system, but at the same time, the obligations of multilateralism are easily forgotten in Beijing. This is a big problem. This is not just my observation. The former Director General of the World Trade Organization, Pascal Lamy, has come up with the same assessment, arguing that China needs to change, otherwise those partner countries of China that are negatively affected have to change their trade policy, and this is what we see at the moment. Nobody likes to suggest that Mr. Trump is right for once, but on China he is. There is bipartisan support in the United States for his policies on China. In Europe, we see just this week, so second week of March, we see that the European Commission is formulating a new strategy for China and on China with a revised assessment of the motivations that Chinese policymakers have. And the trouble is, today, one of the controversies is on Huawei and the 5G equipment. The trouble is, nobody knows what is a private company in China and what isn't. The influence of the government in China on companies is remarkably high, and that makes it very difficult to say, well, these companies we can easily deal with because they're private, and those we better avoid because they are state-owned. This is a complicated situation. Well, they can play a role in facilitating exchange, but the trouble is, when you look at, for instance, the situation in the World Trade Organization, China defines its role in the WTO, not the other member countries of the WTO. So China defines itself as a developing country with fewer obligations than OECD countries. We all know that China is both. It's a developing country, but it's also an industrialized country. And other countries cannot force China to change its policies, say on intellectual property and on subsidized state-owned companies. And this is a very difficult situation. The dialogues with China and of course also between the United States and Europe, they are very useful. But the expectation that was created in 2008, 2009, that the G20 can solve problems that countries don't want to solve, that has turned out to be a bit of wishful thinking. Still, those organizations are useful, but they will not, and when we look at the current conflict between China and the U.S. and the European Union and Japan, I mean, it's not just a conflict between China and the U.S., there are many other important countries involved. The problem is that the G20 can only facilitate, but it cannot basically solve the problems. It cannot tell countries what to do. They have to come up with their own unilateral policy changes. Well, India has certainly changed its position in international relations. It wants to become a player, a more active player. Prime Minister Modi has said that time and again, and I think this is very useful. 10 years ago, India was seeing itself as a victim of globalization. Today, the Indian government wants to defend the benefits of globalization, and that's a structural change which I very much welcome. At the same time, of course, India has not the easiest neighborhood, to put it in very diplomatic terms, and that of course limits the ability of the Indian government. We have just seen terrorist attacks in February in this country. That is of course a very unfortunate and difficult situation, but still I think by and large India has increased its profile on the international in the international arenas, in the international fora. And this is useful. This is useful for the further development of multilateral cooperation, and I'm also sure that it is useful for India. Research institutions cannot set agendas. They should not set agendas, but they can raise awareness of policymakers what issues are to be dealt with, and here I think a lot needs to be done. Germany, by and large, is unaware of the problems in this part of the world. It ignores them at its own peril. I think there is not enough expertise on South Asia, on the Indo-Pacific, and I think the German government and German policymaking circles should consider a more active role in this part of the world. By active role, I don't mean a military role. What I mean is that many people have started to criticize China's Belt and Road Initiative. The trouble is that there is no alternative. Germany and other European countries, but Germany first and foremost, could finance a better Belt and Road Initiative, a Belt and Road Initiative with lower interest rates, with less tight conditions, and I think this is a formidable challenge. We cannot leave the task of financing infrastructure in this growing part of the world just to the World Bank and to the Chinese. This is a European this is an opportunity for Europe, and for the time being there is insufficient understanding that this is not a burden, that this is an opportunity, and that both Germany, India, and of course when I say Germany I mean the countries of the European Union can benefit from those enhanced opportunities in South Asia.